Take my hand, stay, Joanne. Heaven's not ready for you. Every part of my waking heart needs you more than the angels do. Girl, where do you think you're going? Where do you think you're going, girl? That's a song called Joanne by Lady Gaga. And I dedicate that song to my mom whenever I hear it. Today is my mom's birthday. And unfortunately, I had a whole thing planned where I was going to be getting together with my kids for the holidays. And we were going to today, on her birthday, go visit her. Hello, Marie. Welcome. How are you doing? I hope you're well. I hope everybody who watches this now or watches this later is doing well and had a wonderful holiday if you celebrate the holiday that we just had in the US. So, US citizens, happy Thanksgiving. I hope it was as good as it could be for you. I had something really nice planned, like I said, and then I woke up sick on the day I was supposed to leave to go meet up with my kids and do all that stuff. And I was so bummed out. I'm still bummed out. And we were going to visit my hair. My hair is always like a matter of concern for me. Anyway, we had planned to go visit her and bring her flowers and have some remembrances and everything today on her birthday. But me getting sick, and it's pretty rare for me to get physically sick. So I feel like every time I talk about it, I talked a few streams ago about how I rarely get physically sick, but I have an ongoing thing with my mental illness. And I feel like every time I talk about that I don't get physically ill, I end up being physically ill, and that's what happened. So, but today I felt good enough to at least decide to do this live stream. And my mom was a very special person to me. My mom made me the person that I am. And I know that my mom doesn't have a lot to do with the mission of this channel. But I'm making sure. Thank you. A friend sending me love and light. But this channel wouldn't be what it is. And I'm proud of my channel. I'm proud of what I stand for. And that simply wouldn't exist without the influence, the heroic influence that my mother had on me. And she would never be written about in a newspaper. She wouldn't she isn't going to get a Nobel Peace Prize, nothing like that. She's one of those ordinary heroes, the ones that you don't hear about a lot. And I decided, you know what, regardless of how many people watch, how many people care, I want to put her story on the internet in case it inspires other people. And in all honesty, as her daughter, at some points in my history, I wasn't fully appreciative of how heroic she was. And in fact, I didn't learn about how heroic she was in totality until after she died. She died, it'll be on this coming January 29th. It'll be 10 years since she died. She died from complications of rheumatoid arthritis and Parkinson's. Those are just absolutely treacherous diseases. She was bedridden for 10 years. But before she was bedridden and before all of that came, the diseases came and absolutely crippled her. Um, she led a truly remarkable, in my view, life. And again, she's not a famous celebrity, but she is somebody who I think even famous celebrities would look at her life and go, "Wow, what an amazing woman." So I'm here to tell her story, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to share a picture now of, it's really kind of a bummer too that I can't feel safe in sharing her name, um, or more information, and because people are so freaking crazy on the internet. But this is my mom as a baby. She was born in 1943, and she was born into a very, very religious, fundamental Christian family. My great grandmother, her grandmother, had a church, and it was one of those churches where it was kind of like one of those revival churches, where um, they would sing in the spirit, and they would speak in tongues, and they would dance in the spirit, and they would speak in tongues, and they would do things that kind of make people, you see YouTube videos these days of people in these kinds of revivals in Pentecostal churches, and they look crazy, but actually they are in ecstasy. And my mom was brought into that world, and it has its pluses and its minuses. And for my mom growing up, it was a very restrictive um, situation in that tradition. That particular church, and the church that my great grandmother ran, um, people weren't allowed to go to the movie theater. They weren't allowed to dance. They weren't even allowed to roller skate. And, in the few times my mom was allowed to roller skate, she absolutely loved it. And, so that was the upbringing she had. It was incredibly restrictive. She had her parents, my grandparents, were really wonderful, salt of the earth people who had their own troubling backgrounds, but my grandfather, by the time my mom was born, was um, a construction worker. He worked for a major developer and contractor, and he spent all week away from home and came home on the weekends, because that's how the work was. It was where people would go, and workers like him would go and spend an entire week, 100 miles or a few hundred miles away, and then come home during the weekend. And that was a lifestyle. So my mom was, for a big part of her childhood, was under the restrictive orders of my grandmother. And my grandmother was a bit, as my mom told it, smothering. Well, when my mom was 5, and one of the things that this church taught is that the doctor is the devil. That God, maybe not that the doctor is the devil, but that if you get sick, you can deal with it yourself. If going to the doctors was the last resort. And when she was 5, she got the measles, and they didn't take her to the doctor. And as a result, when she turned 11, she was struck with a very, very strong flare up of rheumatoid arthritis. And it was so bad at the age of 11, when she was struck with that arthritis, that she was in bed for her entire 5th grade. Like, I'm not sure how they ended up dealing with that. It was either I don't know. I don't know if she did homework from home, or if they just skipped a grade. I don't remember the details of that. But she was in bed for a full year as a child. And I know that my grandfather, later on, when my grandparents, like after I was born, And after, a number of years, they had kind of gone away from the church and those restrictive practices. And my grandfather felt horrendously guilty that that they wouldn't take her to the doctor, that they didn't take her to the doctor when she had the measles. And he also, he also felt guilty because he carried the rheumatoid arthritis gene. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how all those things are connected. But I think, maybe his thought was, I don't know if any doctors want to comment later. I don't know how measles are connected with rheumatoid arthritis, but I think that, but I do know that intense stress to the body will cause a flare up of rheumatoid arthritis, and then uh, it starts to attack your body. Rheumatoid arthritis is a very um, invasive disease, and so she suffered with rheumatoid arthritis from the time she was 11 years old. And it was a big bugaboo for her because I think she wanted to be more able-bodied. She was a naturally active person and interested in being active, and um, it was really hard for her to move. She had very stiff legs and very stiff hands, but she liked to play tennis. She had to run on her tippy toes because it hurt to run on the balls of her feet. And it was really hard one time she tried to ski, and it was just a catastrophe because it was, when she would fall down, it was too hard for her to operate her body to get up. So anyway, when she was still part of this real restrictive atmosphere in the church in her teenage years. And of course, when you're a teenager and you have that many restrictions, you feel suffocated and rebellious. And she, as much as a teenager of that age could be rebellious, she was. And when she met my father, who was slated to be the preacher of his parents' church later. And so she met him when she was 16 years old. And here's a picture of my mom. Let's see here. Here's a picture of my mom when she was 17 years old. So this is about the age that my mom and dad met. And as you can see, she is a stunning young woman, absolutely stunning young woman. And I think she was under the impression that she met this man who was going to be the preacher of his parents' church. And she couldn't wait to get out of her restrictive house. And so they dated, and then they got married when she was 18. So this was about, she was about this age when my parents got married. But it was within a year. Yeah, she was beautiful. Thank you, Marie. It was about this age also that, I found out later after she died that my father had taken, and this is, I can't prove this. I don't have these pictures. I was told this by a family member after she died. Another testimony to my mother is that she never told me this about my father. Now, some might say she should have told you because of all the things that your father did to you, but I don't hold that against her. Why should my mom tell me the terrible things that my father did to her? She never spoke a bad word about him. She didn't disparage him. She didn't say all the things that she could have said to me about him. She basically just, as much as she could, kept me away from him. But I learned later that around this age, my father had apparently or allegedly taken photos of her and sold them to people. And so, that's, so they got married when she was 18 and he was 20. And within a year after they got married, he was in jail. He he she had a actually let me try to put this timeline together. She they got married. She got pregnant really quickly after that, and then he went to jail, and the charges are also very difficult for me to prove, but he spent a year in jail after, you know, he spent a year in jail, and I believe she was pregnant with my dad or something like that. Again, the timeline is mixed up, and I had to piece a lot of these things together by letters that I saw stashed away. But basically, between me and my brother, between the time that me and my brother were born, my dad was in jail for drug dealing and I believe CP, child, you know what. So um, then he got out of jail and I was born. And within 6 months of me being born, she ran out of the house that they lived in and brought me and my brother to my grandparents' house. And by that point, by the time, by that point, she had a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, and she was a single mother. Now she did have the help of her parents, which I am also deeply, deeply indebted to her parents, my grandparents. If those people didn't exist, my mom and my grandparents, um, I don't know what would have become of me. I really don't. I look at all these true crime cases. I look at the way children are today who didn't have the chances that I had with a mother and grandparents like I had, and I weep for them because I've seen a glimpse, I've felt a glimpse of what it's like to have that kind of depravity. Now, when my parents got divorced, they tried to, co-parent and things like that. My dad picked us up, you know, um, infrequently. I think he probably provided a total of $500 in child support the entire time they of me growing up. He was a flake. That's just all there is to it. So the support of me and my brother fell completely onto her, and we lived with my grandparents until I was like 4 or 5 years old, and then she went out on her own, and we lived in a little apartment in Hawthorne, California, which is not a great neighborhood. It was right down the street from the Forum. If anybody watching this knows where the Forum is, not a great neighborhood. And she struck out on her own, and oh, she struck out on her own, and she was able to land a few good jobs, and eventually ended up working at a aerospace company for 40 years. 40 years. And, there are a few different jobs along the way. She was also a model for a model for Sparklets. She did like a modeling job for Sparklets water. As you can see, she's model beautiful. So, but she was able to eventually land in a job. And now remember, she was 18 when she got divorced, when she got married, and she graduated from high school, but she did not go to college. So the only kinds of jobs that she could get as a woman really were as like a clerk or a secretary. And she got this job at this aerospace company. She worked at this job for 40 years, or at the same company for 40 years. And by the time she retired, she had gone to night school and got her bachelor's degree. She was the first woman, she was the first person in our family to get a college degree. I was the second. And but she did that, she had to do it while working full time, going to school at night. And she didn't actually get the degree until I was something like, I don't know, I was like 16, 17, 18 by the time she got her bachelor's degree, but it did elevate her position at the at the at the company. And by the time she retired, she had been um, in a top position at that company. Not, she wasn't top management or anything like that, but she earned a very good income by the time she left. And she had, she, she this is the stuff of, of heroes, because not only did she do all those things, she was also legitimately disabled. She was a legitimately disabled woman, because sometimes she could barely move. Sometimes in the morning she could barely wake up to get out of bed. She would come home. I remember distinctly, she would come home at night, and she constantly suffered from headaches. These illnesses are just horrible. They ravage your body. It was the autoimmune disease, and sometimes they would flare up, and she rarely missed work. She did miss work sometimes, but not to the degree that you might if you're a legitimately disabled person. In the meantime, she's raising these two kids, me and my older brother, and we were kids of the 70s, and kids of the 70s, regardless of whether you have two parents in the home or not, kids in the 70s were wild and running free in the streets, and we were wild. We were absolutely wild. We gave her constant problems. Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I apologized to my mom, as after I grew up and got older. I can't tell you how many times I have sat and thought, wow, what it had, especially after I had kids, wow, what it must have been like to be a single mother raising two kids like us. It's truly astounding, and I grew an entirely new appreciation for her. And along the way, she also became an incredible singer and pianist. So she was one of these people who was always asked to sing at family weddings or play the piano at family weddings. And I tried to learn the piano. Let me tell you, I I could play chopsticks, but she had the discipline to sit down every day and practice. The unfortunate thing, though, is that when you have arthritis and it starts crippling your fingers and you don't have the range of motion, it's really hard to play the piano. So we always had music in our house. We always had, you know, she really influenced my musical taste too. I mean, if anybody has ever checked out my singing channel, I love classic rock because my mom was really into classic rock. She played Led Zeppelin and she played Steely Dan, and she always also loved, Joni Mitchell and all that type of stuff. And in the meantime, she's this single woman raising two kids. And here's the other thing that's going on in the workplace while she's doing all this. She is being hella sexually harassed. I mean, one of her bosses literally chased her around his desk. And then she ran out of his office and hid in her car until he stopped bugging her. At one time, I guess she gave him a ride home, or gave that colleague, that boss, a ride home, and he demanded that he kiss her, and she refused. And she still stayed at that company working for that man, and because there weren't many choices. There weren't many choices at that time. She also took in other work. She was this incredible typist. I mean, luckily you don't need as much of a finger span, to be a typist. And she was a typist, an incredible typist on those old, typewriters that just were clank, 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 clank. So she could type like 90 words a minute, and she took in people's typing. She would type transcripts. So she did that on the weekend. And when she was going to school, she was interested in psychology. She wanted to become that was her real dream, was becoming a clinical psychologist. And so while she was going to school, sometimes she was one of those people that answered, unaliving hotlines. Like, I remember she would tell us, okay, I'm on call tonight. So if I get a phone call, please give me my privacy, because I'm going to be probably talking to somebody who's in crisis. And, at the time, I just never appreciated what she was actually doing, but that was an incredible service. And in the meantime, I think back on her as a character, as a human being, and she never gossiped about people. When she talked about people and she had anything, any observations, any critical observations of them, it was usually out of concern, not out of like just catty, snarky criticism. She didn't disparage people's looks. She never shamed people. She never shamed me. Never ever in my life did she shame me. She always built me up, and and again, just looking back on that now, and especially now as I look around the world and we have more access to information about how other people are brought up, and how other, and the character of other people, I appreciate that so much more now, that she had that kind of character. She could have been brutal about my father and about the things that he did to her. I didn't learn until after he died, or she died, that one time when they one of the few times when they did a parent exchange, when he came to pick us up or drop us off or something, he RAPE'd her. And so, it doesn't surprise me. It just angers me, and makes me feel sad for because, and the way people looked at women at that time, and still a lot to this day, will say, well, it's your fault for being so beautiful that I couldn't resist you. No, it's not. It's not a woman's fault for being so beautiful. It's your responsibility to control yourself, to be able to control your emotions. You're not a strong man or woman if you can't control yourself enough to keep yourself from crossing those boundaries, from treating another person as a piece of meat or a piece of property, or like they're nothing more than a sexual object to you. And so, as I said, my brother and I were real difficult kids. We were both into drugs and alcohol by the time we were 12. It's hard to say, but it's true. And I've told this story a few times about when I was 16, I got arrested for murder. I didn't do it. I was in the car of a guy who did do it and didn't know it. And we got arrested to get the cops found the car that he had stolen from the man he killed, and we were all in it with him, and we all went to jail one night while they were trying to figure out, were we part of it. And it was pretty clear very quickly that me and the other two people in the car with him had nothing to do with it, that it was all him and only him. And they let us go. But I had to call my mom when I was 16 years old and tell her I was in jail. It was 4:00 in the morning, and call this woman who is already going through all this stuff. She's been hella harassed at work. She's been raising 2 kids. We've been complete rebels. We're like, And then I call her one day and say I'm in jail because they arrested me for murder. I mean, can you imagine? If one of my kids called me today and said I would lose it. And she was like, Lynn, I'm not up for your jokes. She also had an incredible sense of humor. But I think she was hoping that it was a joke. She was hoping it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. So, but that was my mom. And so that was when I was 16. And in the meantime, not only am I being arrested for, the M word with some real M word, I was stealing her car and going to Hollywood and driving it drunk and crashing it. And my brother was crashing the other car, the other car that she got to replace the car. I seriously don't know. And, I've written papers about how I feel, guilty for, bringing that kind of stress onto her, because stress is a trigger for her rheumatoid arthritis. Every time, whenever there's too much stress, it brings another flare up. And every time there's a flare up, it causes more damage to the body. So every time she would have a major rheumatoid arthritis flare up, it would, cause more damage to her body. And, my brother also had his own stuff going on. One time he dislocated his neck. He almost broke his neck. He dislocated his neck and was in traction for a week because he was out being an Evel Knievel when he was 12 years old. So this woman went through all this stuff, and she maintained her dignity. She maintained this incredible spirit, and she was always the other thing that, after we were born, and her and my grandparents kind of went away from the restrictive fundamentalist church, they stayed spiritual. They still continued to believe in God. And she taught me about that spirituality. And she was always seeking other ways to, to connect with that spirituality. And she brought me along with her. She wanted me to learn how to, determine for myself what kind of, spiritual journey I want to be on. And there was this family in our neighborhood that had all these kids, and one of the kids was my best friend. And sometimes they would take us to Catholic church on Sunday mornings. So later on in life, I became Catholic. I converted. I went to classes for 2 years to become Catholic. And my mom and my grandparents completely supported me in that, because they knew that as long as I was connecting to, a spiritual realm, I would have maybe a better journey. But by the time I became Catholic, I had already been such a troubled kid. And like I said, we were drinking and using drugs from the time we were 12, 13, 14. And then when I was 18, one day I was drinking and I started having flashbacks about the things my dad did to me. And I went home and I was just sitting on my front lawn, just thinking about it. And it was like 4 a.m. and my mom came out and she sat next to me. And I said, I just remembered something. And it's that, Dad did these things to me. And I'll just never forget, her response was, "That pig." And, I think we were already set up to go to put me in rehab. I didn't know it, but she had already by that time. It was a really weird turn of events, because, she told me after I graduated from high school that if I didn't get a job or start going to school, that she was going to kick me out. If I didn't get a job or start going to school by the time I was 18. And these are the hard lines that she had to start drawing, because she saw that if she didn't draw these lines, that I was just going to continue to waste away, on alcohol and drugs. So it was just a few days before these flashbacks came to me that she called me and said, all right, you're 18 now, you don't have a job and you're not in school, so we're going to go to this counseling appointment. Well, this counseling appointment turned out to be an intervention with a counselor at a drug and alcohol rehab. And I just have this vivid memory of us three sitting in this office, me thinking that it was just a counseling appointment, but then the woman, the counselor there, just starts saying, I think you're an alcoholic. You smell like an alcoholic, you look like an alcoholic, you're bloated, your life is unmanageable, you can't keep a job, you drink every day, you get up at 1:00 p.m. and you stay up until 4 a.m, and life can't go on like this. So, and I remember my mom sitting there just weeping, but knowing, I think she was afraid. They basically gave me a choice. You can either, she gave me a choice in that room. She said, you can either stay here in this rehab or you're out on the street. And she had to take that was an incredibly bold move. She was basically saying, ready to let me go if I didn't get my act together. And in that moment, I went, oh my God, like, I don't have any way to support myself on the street. I don't want to be kicked out of my house. So I was like, all right, I'll stay. And I have not had a drink since that time. And so that's why I say that my mom is and I'm sorry if I get emotional here. It's hard not to get emotional talking about this person in my life. That's why I say she's a lifesaver, because if she hadn't had the strength and the courage and the backbone, to do that, I wouldn't be here today. I truly believe that. I truly, truly believe that. And, and from that rehab helped me so much. Now, it didn't really address my actual mental illness. I was a participant in Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time. It didn't. I wasn't really addressing my actual mental illness, so that came later. But it was all, again, and I'm bringing this back to my mother again. She was the one who encouraged me to look deeper into whether I had a mental illness and whether I needed to go on some sort of medication. And after being in hardcore AA, where even in AA, in some groups in AA, they're like, no, don't take any kind of substance whatsoever. It's almost like Scientology, like just in some groups, not all of AA. And I don't even know how AA is now, because I don't participate in AA groups, but a lot of them were hardcore against any kind of medication, even if it was, antidepressants or psychological help meds. So I resisted that for a long time. And then after I had kids and she was there, I think I might have this picture of me and my mom celebrating the birth of yes, here we go. So there's me and my mom. That was the night that my son was born. And, as you can tell, I don't mind showing very unflattering photos of myself. And even this one, that picture of myself in my awkward years, right? There we are celebrating the birth of my first son. And she could not wait. And look at her hands. Look at her hands there. Do you see how big her knuckles are? And it was hard for her to even sit in a car at that time. And she had to sit in a car for something like 7-8 hours in the middle of the night to be able to see her grandson right after he was born. And, that was that was really, really, really special to me. And, she stayed single. She stayed single until I was 26 years old. There were many men who wanted her to marry up with them. She got asked, she was proposed marriage something like 4 or 5 different times by 4 or 5 different guys. And only 2 of them she had a serious relationship with. I mean, she was a very desirable, just human being, not just because of her beauty, but because she was just a good human being. She was the mom in the neighborhood that other kids would come and seek shelter when their parents were being assholes. This one kid in our neighborhood, he was allergic to Tide, and one night he was having an allergic reaction to Tide. Like his bed linens had been washed with Tide, and his mom didn't, forgot or something or other, and he was having an allergic reaction, and she got pissed at him for having the allergic reaction, and this kid ran to our house for shelter, for solace, for sanctuary, and my mom gave that to him. She was just a good person. I can't think of a time when she was she showed any malice, toward anybody, where she was vindictive or ugly. She never body shamed people. She never tried to make people feel less. Just, just revel in that as a person. Think about being a person who never wants to make other people feel bad about themselves. She never wanted anybody to feel bad about themselves. So, but as you can see there, like I said, she was very, she was very crippled by her arthritis, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. By the time I had my second child, she wasn't healthy enough to be able to come. And so we would start to visit her. And, by the by, she did end up getting married, and she ended up getting married to a man who took care of her in her last 10 years. And, I'm grateful to him for that. And if it weren't for him, she would have had, it would have been a challenge for her to stay as comfortable as she was for the last, 10 years of her life. But it was really difficult for her because she was extremely sharp. She was a very curious, very incredibly intellectually curious human being. She wanted to know everything. She was analytical. If you think I'm analytical, that's where I got it. My mom and I would sit there and just analyze things. Well, why do you think that happened? Well, why do you think that happened? And we would watch movies together. One of our favorite movies to watch together was Grease, and we would both sing along with all of the songs. And another movie that we love watching together was A Star Is Born, the first one, or the second one, with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson, and we would sing those songs together. And I just can't say enough that this human being was among one of very, very few people in my life who always, 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 no matter what, had my back. But she didn't enable me. As you can see, she didn't enable me to be a jerk. And one day came the time when I had to call her and tell her that I was planning to get a divorce. And at first, I mean, that was hard for her to hear, but she still supported me. She supported me. She was there for me. And by that time, she was already just completely immovable in her bed. But she would type emails to me. Just at that point, all she could do is just kind of go like this with her fingers to type, and she would hunt and peck, and she would type emails to me, and my brother. And she, we would talk on the phone, and she the thing that really bothered her the most, though, was that she kept losing more and more of her memory. Like, it started out with little things, and then it got worse and worse, where, she, she's like, the other day I was like, wanted to pause the sound on the TV, or I wanted to pause the TV, and I couldn't remember what button to hit. And that drove her insane because she was so sharp, and she didn't want to live like that. But she also wanted to have time with her grandchildren. And so, she hung in there. She hung in there for as long as she possibly could. And by the time by the time pneumonia took over her, because when you're in bed for that long and you've got so many things, you've got an autoimmune disease, eventually you're going to get fluid in your lungs, and it's going to cause pneumonia, and your body's not, especially when you have an autoimmune disease, your body's not strong enough to fight against it. And also, for anybody who knows about the treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, some of the treatments are actually dialed down versions of chemotherapy. So even the treatment for the rheumatoid arthritis ravages the body. And they didn't know until like 5 years before she died that she actually had Parkinson's. And Parkinson's on its own is a incredibly painful, very difficult disease. You can't swallow as well. You have they have these episodes, like it's called evening shadows, or I forget what it's called, but there's a time of the night where there's like hallucination and delusions. And I remember at one point she thought that people were watching her through the window, and then they finally had to up her medication. And excuse me, sorry, I'm still getting over trying. I don't even know if I'm getting over it. I think I still have it. Hold on. So she held on. I mean, one thing that my dad used to say about her a lot whenever we got together was that my mom had the highest threshold for pain of any person he ever knew. And she never complained, even though she was always going through. She had this pain in her body at all times. She never complained. Never. We knew it was there, but she never complained. She would get frustrated at her inability to, at her disability, basically. She was disabled. It was just hard for her to walk, and hard. She couldn't do endurance things. And that frustrated her, but she never complained. She wasn't a whiner like I could be sometimes. She wasn't a whiner. So in some regards, I think that we didn't have that great of appreciation for how much she was going through. But by the time she died, she had whittled down to like 74 pounds. She was absolutely skeletal, and I would never show a picture of her like that, because she would kill me. If, she would strike me with lightning, because she was very proud of her looks, and rightfully so. She wasn't arrogant about it, but she was proud of her looks. And she already was a tiny woman. She was a tiny woman her entire life, but by the time she died, she had basically dwindled down to nothing. And the reason that song Joanne resonates with me so much, take my hand, stay Joanne. Her husband called me one night and basically told me she's going into hospice. And I raced, from where I was living to, it was like a 9-hour drive from where I was living to where they were. And I even got pulled over by a cop for speeding. And I was like, my mom's in hospice. And he goes, oh, when did she get put into hospice? And I go, this morning. And he goes, oh, she's got time, asshole. So anyway, I get there at like 6 o'clock, and I got there at 7 o'clock p.m. And I was trying to help figure out whether we were going to put her in, a home hospice situation or a hospice facility. And as I was sitting there trying to figure it out, and she was unconscious in the bed right next to me, I looked up and she was gone. I looked up and I could tell her eyes were open, but she wasn't there. And, my life as I knew it ended. Just a second. Sorry, y'all. I'm still here. I'm fine. It's just, and when she died, I hadn't been properly diagnosed or medicated. And her death really drove me. Like it got me to a point where I was like, okay, if I'm going to have such a strong reaction, everybody's parent dies, Yeah, it was a little bit early, I would say, she was only 69 years old. But if I'm going to have such a strong, dramatic reaction to a natural thing of life, people lose their parents all the time. But I was acting as if I was the only person who ever lost a parent. And it's just, but I logically knew that that's not true. So I sought real treatment at that time. I really started seeking for more information about mental illness, about, I knew that there was just something much more wrong with me than I'm an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. I knew that there was much more going on. I was so racked with pain in my head all the time. So it was my mom's death that really, she was once again saving me, because if it weren't for her, I don't know, the inspiration, I knew after she was gone that, if I didn't have her, I needed, like, really all I have is me. It's down to me to take care of myself. It's down to me. I'm a grown woman now with my own children. I need to figure out what's going on. And I went and got help, and I got properly diagnosed and treated. And, I kind of wish that she was still here so that she could see that I'm much better. I'm not a better person. I've never been a terrible person. I mean that I'm coping much better, that I understand what's going on with my life. But, I truly believe, and I'm a spiritual person. I believe she knows. I believe she's with me. I have a very strong spiritual connection with her. In fact, I didn't really start singing for therapy until after she died. And one of the reasons I gravitated towards singing for therapy is because sometimes when I sing, I can hear her voice. And that's just miraculous to me. I just love being able to hear my mom's voice come through me. It's certain songs and certain tones and certain notes. I can hear her singing through me. And I know it's not her, but I can hear, like, it sounds very similar. And other people that in my family that have heard my singing and her singing have said the same thing. So Um, and to this day, every day, she inspires me, and she reminds me of what it's like to be a real warrior. You know, she's a warrior. She fought through everything, and she stayed above it. She never retaliated, became nasty or ugly. She never did, hate campaigns against people. Um, she she dealt with her issues, and she dealt with them with class and bravery and courage and strength, and that to me is what a warrior looks like. A survivor. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. She was a soul provider. She was a lifesaver. She was a musician. She was my mom. And I'm the lucky one for that. So thank you very much. I just want this to be on the internet for her. Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I couldn't visit you today and take you flowers, but hopefully this will help. Thank you for anybody watching now. Thank you for those of you who watch later. I do plan to do some members only lives soon about Scientology, because I feel like really the people who are most interested in my Scientology content are my members. So I'm going to be doing some members only lives about Scientology, and I will continue doing my content. Please consider subscribing, becoming a member, hitting the thumbs up, and I will see you around. Peace out.